Hi, this is Paul, and I have a new voice on the channel, Sherry Hawkins. Do I have that correct?
Nope, it's Harkins,
Harkins.
H-A-R-K-I-N-S.
Harkins. Oh,
Close, very close. Yeah,
very
that happens a
close.
lot.
So Sherry contacted me, and we were just discussing. I just shared with her that the demographic group that I've done the most conversations with, and afterwards, the people have said, let's not share it on your channel, have been middle-aged women, not older women, not younger women, but women right in the middle. So we already negotiated that. So we'll see how this goes.
That's right. We'll see how it goes. That's right.
Well, Sherry, let's begin with your story. Who are you, and why are you talking to me?
Well, I found your channel through Jordan Peterson listening, like many people. It showed up that way. And I was very interested in what you had to say. I have been a Christian since I was 18 years old, and I sort of came about my faith in a more unusual way and has taken many twists and turns, and it's been an interesting journey. But some of the ways that you were talking resonated very much with my own ways that I've been thinking lately, especially maybe in the last 5 years or so, and kind of giving consideration to what God might be doing in the world and how are we supposed to respond to it. And, like many people, I think the older I have gotten, the more I've realized I don't know. And, I think that can be a good place to be. The less, I think I've always been kind of open to the mystical and to an understanding that we really don't have a handle on things, but at the same time, we always want to fit in with where we are. And I also think God gives us different things at different times and seasons in our life. And so the last 5 years, even the last 10 years has really been a different season for me. So and then when I listen to your channel, there's things, your station, what do you call a podcast? When I listen to your podcast, what's the best way to refer to that? Just your podcast?
Podcast, fine.
Yeah. Many of the people that I hear talking and many of the ideas are really similar to a lot of my own thoughts. So, just again, that I feel like that's kind of confirming that God is doing something. So,
Okay.
presently, I am an artist, and I have 4 children, and they're all grown up and doing great. And I've been married to my husband for 42 years, and I have 8 grandchildren. And
Now I'm jealous. I got 5 kids and no grandkids yet. It's like, when I think about grandkids, it's like, that's what I want.
frozen.
Oh, I'm unfrozen now.
Yeah.
I got my little rant on
Yeah.
my side, so it got recorded.
Good. Yeah. So it's just interesting to find myself here. I live in New England, and it's a very progressive liberal area, and most of the people around me are very progressive and liberal. And so trying to find opportunities for conversations where we can explore different ideas can be really difficult. So
Okay. What do you want to talk about today?
well, I'd be happy to tell you about how I became a believer. I think that
I'd
was
love
what
to
I
hear that.
Yes, on your website. So it has been a number of years, but it's a good story still, I think.
Okay.
So I grew up kind of moving all over the place. My parents were young and beautiful, and I was the oldest of 4 kids. And I do want to be aware of how I speak about this. So they my mom actually met my dad when he was speaking in a church as a youth speaker, which was kind of interesting because based on what happens in the story later. But they got together. They were both from New England, also different towns, but both very smart, very beautiful, very destined for big things in the future. My dad came from a different background than my mother did. My mother's dad was a professional college graduate who, she had always intended to go to college. My father's family, he was one of 8 children and the oldest of 8. And
Wow.
grew up in a small house with 3 little bedrooms and a lot more togetherness and probably tension in the house. So they got together and got married and started their life together. And they were very young. My dad was 19, my mom was 20. They were both in college at the time. And then he, after graduating, went into the service, went into the army. I was with my mom for a little while before we moved to Germany and lived in Germany for a couple of years, and then came back, and he kind of started on a career path. And he was it was such an interesting mix, because originally they were both sort of somewhat conservative, moved away from the church and got more and more involved in the culture of the 60s and the 70s. It seemed like it was a long time, but really I was only 13 when my dad left. So it couldn't have been that many years, but it felt like a long time. It was a sort of gradual progression of a lot more partying in their lives. And my dad became more and more successful in business. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And
what year did you leave?
Oh, maybe 73.
Yeah, there was a lot of that in the early 70s.
Right, exactly. So we had kind of moved around to a lot of different areas. And as a result of that, I was kind of my mom's confidant, as well as, having, it was just always difficult sort of making new friends and trying to figure out your place in a new place. And I was very awkward, very sort of, I was much bigger than everybody else. I've kind of been the same size I am now, maybe 20 pounds lighter, but the same size I am now since I was like 10 or 11. So I was bigger than everybody else. It was just a bad situation for me often. And I don't know, I'm really not sure what all went on in my mom's head, but because we moved around a lot, I think one small part of the issue between us was that I was kind of a confidant. So as my dad was living this life that was increasingly flirtatious and increasingly drug and alcohol related, particularly alcohol, and they were moving up in the world and sort of social status and, gaining different things in their lives materially. I became aware of a lot of bad things in their marriage and bad things in their life. And it was not good at all for a 10-year-old, 11-year-old to be in that position. And so there was a lot of, there's all kinds of things I'm still sort of realizing I didn't have an accurate perception on as a kid that, continue to become uncovered. But Dad was doing, and he was also a very brilliant man. He wrote a lot of books. He was very young. He was a vice president for a major corporation before he was 30, and just doing very well in a lot of areas. So we moved to an area of Pennsylvania. They built their dream home. I was 13, I think, at the time. And basically my mother told him he needed to stop drinking or leave. And he left because it was, he was only 33, 32 at the time. And instead of living at home with 4 kids, he was able to go live in a high-rise apartment and date girls that were just a little older than me and live a very different lifestyle. And again, my perspective has changed on some of what happened and recognizing things are more complicated than we think. But my mother basically just went crazy. She kind of just had no idea what to do with that. She wasn't prepared for it. And there was a lot of really bad dynamic that continued to happen between the two of them. And the family just, sort of dissolved. We tried going to see the pastor of a church that we had been kind of somewhat attending very irregularly since we lived there. And we tried going to a family counseling center, all kinds of things. So this was, my dad was no part of this. This was my mother and my siblings and myself. And I have a sister who's 3 years younger than me, who had a really hard time with my mom. And she kind of refused to take sides, is the way that, you know, the way that she would frame it, and didn't want to be there. I was trying very hard to sort of keep things together for I had a brother that was only 4 at the time and a sister who was 7. And I was very concerned about them because my mother was doing the best she could, but not at all able to manage life or anything. The biggest thing is that there was hysterical screaming and demanding and everything every day. And we were, you know, we were living in a lovely home in a lovely area and very unprepared. We didn't have any family in the area. My grandparents would come and visit us and try to sort of work something out. In fact, I remember my grandfather standing in the kitchen and saying, Satan is in this house. Satan is here in this house. And they were, I mean, he was, you know, sort of my hero in many ways. He was very kind of rock steady. He, many times as I was growing up, my mom and dad would have an argument, and my mom would grab my siblings and I and get in the car and drive back to her parents' house. And so they were, you know, certainly aware that things were happening, but it had just escalated to such a terrible degree. So the hardest part of it was the yelling, you know, and just like her not being able to kind of control herself in the way that she responded. So meanwhile, my father was, you know, just continuing on the road that he was on. And my sister, who was 3 years younger than me, ended up going to live in a group home in foster care for left at home because she and my mother were just not able to work things out. And eventually, after a little while, moved in with a friend's parents and a friend's family, and stayed and became kind of a part of their family and never came home. My other 2 siblings, my best friend, who ended up becoming my husband, and I tried to talk to them about going to live with an aunt in New England because it was just so bad at home and there was just no stability. And so one of them did. My sister did go and live with an aunt. My brother was not able to he didn't want to leave my dad, which was very understandable. So meanwhile, and this is so crazy, part of it. So my mother, meanwhile, there was all these crazy things happening in the house. The house was apparently haunted, and it was a brand new house my parents had built. There was no like ancient Indian Native American ground or, you know, anything like that. This was a brand new house they had built, but there was all these crazy things that were happening, like intense smells that, you know, would show up in one particular pocket of the house, or temperature changes that would go on, or the front door would blow open in the middle of the night and, you know, had been locked and it would blow open, or furniture would get moved around from one spot to another, just crazy, crazy things. So I was working after school at a diner nearby, and I had a good friend there who was very helpful to me. I mean, it was the sort of thing, because of the behavior of my mom, I didn't feel like I could leave my siblings at home with her. So as much as possible, I tried to be with them or take them with me, or just have my friends. And she was, you know, trying to sort of find her way with dating other men, and I'm sure sort of reassuring herself in the midst of what was happening in her own life and the way everything was being crumbled and destroyed and all the pictures she had of life. So she was honestly doing the best she could. You know, again, in retrospect, you look back and you can see that. And I felt very close to her. I felt more like she was my friend than something else. At the same time, it was just so difficult to deal with because I didn't know how to stop it. Nothing, when she would turn into the rages, which were almost every day, I couldn't stop them. You know, there was nothing that I could do that could stop it. I could see it overtaking her.
Sure.
And when she wasn't in that state of mind, you know, she was funny and pleasant, and she ended up going back to school to finish her degree, and she went to work full time, and all of those things I'm sure were very difficult for her. And she was very beautiful and very young too, and so there was all those parents without partners and, you know, all those singles groups that she became a part of. So I know she was having a hard time balancing sort of school and work and parenting and trying to find a life for herself in the midst of this. So I, you know, taking care of my youngest siblings felt very natural. Like being the oldest sibling, I had sort of always been in that role anyway, especially because my parents had such a rocky relationship. So I was sort of used to kind of trying to manage things for everyone. But I ended up becoming very involved in some of the partying myself that was going on at the same time. If you could say I was a responsible pot smoker, that is how I would define myself, because I was still very much taking care of my siblings. But that was kind of my escape. And because my mom was so, you know, involved in other things, she wasn't really policing or caring anything about what was going on at the home. So my house, and I had like a giant bedroom over a big 2-car garage. And so all my friends just came there and, you know, hung out at the house with me so I could get my siblings to bed or just make sure they were around. And, you know, that worked out okay. And so my best friend was very helpful to me in navigating all this. I couldn't have done it without him. He was very, very good at sort of walking me through and being there with me and taking the siblings out when we needed to. And we even had them for holidays, sometimes with his
You became de
parents.
facto parents in some ways.
Exactly. So do you have any questions so far? I'm sorry.
No, you're going great. Keep going.
All right. So then, so that there was all these weird things happening in the house with all this, these spooky things. And I mean, everybody that came to the house noticed it. And there was even some dangerous things that were going on. Like my husband and I were wallpapering my bedroom, trying to do things that would make my mom happy. You know, she had wanted to wallpaper the bedroom. So we were doing that. And we were unrolling the wallpaper to put it up on the wall, and the lamp that had been sitting somewhere, you know, suddenly jumped off into the watering trowel that our hands had just come out of. And I mean, it sounds so crazy, but it was really crazy. Like things would jump out of the closet from behind other things and land on the floor. And then I was in a car accident when I was 16. And, you know, I had just run out to get gas in the car before I went to work, and had my brother, my little baby, he was like, I think, he was probably 5 at the time. And his little girlfriend that was playing, ran over with me. It was just like 5 minutes from my house. And somebody in the afternoon, somebody who was drugged out, ended up smashing into me head on. And I lost my eyelid and had to have quite a bit of plastic surgery over a long period of time, just, you know, sort of dealing with all of that. But praise God, I did not have any damage to my sight at all, which was just, you know, I mean, years later, I'm still so grateful for that. When I think as an artist, it's all about seeing. So, you know, just an amazing thing that God did not let anything happen that would affect my eyes. So anyway, a few other minor injuries, but that was the big one. So anyway, my mother around this time went to talk to the psychic and where we lived. And in that time period, you know, psychics were even more of a big thing than they are now. Yep. And how do I say this? Basically, the psychic told her we were under demonic attack. And I won't go into more about why she said that was happening, but she said we were under demonic attack, and the only way to do battle with that was to put our faith and trust in Jesus Christ, and that we needed to pray that he would protect us, and we needed to get crosses, all of us, that it needed to be something that that we were under the protection. So my mother came home, and it was a very long story and has to do with a lot of the things I don't want to go into detail
Okay.
with. But we had been through, like I said, we tried to talk to the pastor. We'd had all these family interventions. We tried to go to counseling, and at the counseling, it was just my mother and my sister would just scream at each other at the top of their lungs. I mean, there was nothing that helped. There was nothing. And so this was like a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years after it had all started, and there was nothing that was making any difference, maybe even a little more than that. Nothing helped, there was just like, I just went through the days sort of not sure what to do, thinking, I just didn't know. By that time, it was just my brother and I at home with my mom. And and he was still seeing my dad. At that time, I wasn't seeing my dad, partly because of some things that happened in relationship to when I was in the accident, but really, mainly it was because I thought it was one less thing I had to deal with my mother, because she was so freaked when, whenever anybody would go see him, it was a definite catalyst. So, this psychic tells my mother that. So my mother came home and told me this very long story as we were sitting in the evening after dinner, and told me this story. The same table where just a few days before I had been drinking a glass of milk that flew out of my hand across the table and smashed into the wall behind my siblings who were sitting at the table. It was just that sort of craziness. And like I said, everybody who came to the house responded, like didn't know anything about the story. And
Right.
They heard all the yelling, because there was nothing that would make my mother not yell. She didn't care if people were there or if anyone was around. But so she came home and told me the story, and it was remarkable because there were all these pieces that fit into the dynamic that was happening at home. So I was just sort of like blown away. It was just such a crazy idea. But I went and bought crosses for everybody, and I talked to a couple of friends of mine later that night, my husband and another good friend, and told them all these things that had happened. And they were both like, wow, like that's so crazy. Like all these pieces of what you were talking about, that a lot of which has to do with how cults work and how sort of demonic worship works and how things like that go on. So it all seemed very crazy to us, really, truly, it seemed crazy. But we were sort of had nothing to lose in trying to pray. So, and trying to get the crosses. So I did that. I bought crosses for everyone. And then within a few days, Rob, my husband, was my friend at the time, was over, and we were doing something, and my mother came in and started. We could hear that she was building up, to a rage. And so we just said, let's just pray. So the only prayer we knew was the Lord's Prayer. So we both started to pray that. He was actually in Catholic school. But we worked together in this restaurant. So we just started to pray. We held hands, we prayed. And for the first time in 5 or 6 years, she stopped yelling. Like there was
Wow.
nothing I could ever before that would make her stop. Nothing. I mean, I would cry, I would plead with her. I would try to say, can you think about it this way? Nothing stopped, but she stopped, and she opened the door. We were like standing on the stairs to the finished basement, and she opened the door and she said, Rob, Sherry, are you okay? and we were just like completely blown away, could not believe that there had been an impact. So, but we thought maybe that was just a fluke thing, but okay, like that is kind of cool. Let's see what happens. And so then we continued to pray the next time she did something. And again, there was an effect that had never been there before. And so we just continued to build up our faith. So then we started doing all this research on what happens with demonic worship, how do cults work, how do covens work, what is all of that about? We started to read our Bible and just looking for the answers to, could this be something that's actually going on? Could this be something that was happening? And we went and talked to this psychic ourselves, and she, gave us all this information and told us about more of the same thing. So it was a fascinating way to become a believer, but I don't think there was another way necessarily that God could have reached me, like
Wow.
I don't know that I would have, that another entry in would have intrigued me as much as this one did, to
Hmm.
kind of say, this is fascinating. Could it be true that there are demonic spirits, and could it be true that evil is real? And yet I was seeing it every day in my daily existence. And so
Well, it was a
uh,
part of your felt need at that moment. I mean,
mhm,
you're living in chaos. Your parents' marriage has blown up. Your mother is not doing well, let's say it that way.
mhm,
And you and your best friend, who are really not yet at an age where you should be responsible for your parents, are not only
mhm,
having to take responsibility for your parents, but also your siblings. And you needed help. You needed
mhm,
real help. And when it comes to someone who is not in good control of themselves, especially with respect to their anger, and may very well have some very legitimate things to be angry about, but it still doesn't mean that just being angry and getting angrier and angrier is helping them at all.
right.
You two needed help. And, I've seen many times in my life, uh, God can bring help to people in very surprising ways. And I find we're often a lot pickier than God is um, in terms of the people and methods that God chooses to use to
Mhm.
help people and rescue people. So, wow. So, so what happens next? Do you become Christian? Do you start going to church? What does that look like?
Well, first we just kept smoking a lot of pot and telling all our friends about how amazing this was, that Jesus Christ was real, and that, I mean, everyone knew, all of the people that were at our house all the time knew that what the situation was
Yeah,
at my house. The creepy, scary stuff and the rages that happened every day. And
yeah,
so, maybe that gave us some sort of credibility at the same time as everyone was incredulous that this could actually be happening. So we just ended up having all these conversations with people, telling them, you can't believe this, and all these other, the details that she talked to us about, that the psychic talked to us about, that seemed to make sense to us. So it was very exciting. I mean, as much as it was like so weird, it was also very exciting to, to have to be entering into this alternate universe and finding that there was reality to it. So at the same time, so that the person who eventually became my husband, who was my best friend, we just eventually said we may as well start dating. And then once we were starting dating, it was like, well, we may as well get married, because that would just be the next step. So it was none of the wonderful stories you hear today of, all my daughters have these great stories of their husbands proposing to them. It wasn't like that, but he did great stuff in being there for me all those years. So I got married when I was 20 also. So it was a few years, but interestingly enough, he had grown up in the Catholic Church, and he went to parochial school his whole life. His dad was, part of the Knights of Columbus, very involved in the church. His mom was Lutheran, so they had to get married outside the church. But at the same time that we became believers, his sister was going to a Baptist Bible study at work. She became a believer. I mean, not, they may have been, I don't want to say they had no familiarity with being believers, but he would not have said he started the journey really until this whole time period. And his brother, who was 10 years older than him, was part of the charismatic Catholic movement. So he had sort of really embraced his faith too. So the three of them, and then his mom also ended up joining the Catholic Church and becoming very involved in that. So it was very interesting, because they all, like within a year, they all became believers in totally different ways. His sister mostly thought that we were not really Christians because we still smoked cigarettes and she didn't, and she knew that there was other involvement, but we were not even really considered believers. But his sister thought speaking in tongues was of the devil, and his brother thought you had to speak in tongues to be saved. So all the family gatherings were very intense, and so Rob and I, smoking our cigarettes, were like, well, let's go look it up in the Bible. And so we would go home and read and see what it said. And then, well, Paul does say he wishes everybody spoke in tongues, but there does seem to need to be an interpreter. So, it doesn't seem like either of them are really, so we were like always doing that kind of and looking and then doing research about it and trying to figure it out. So we went to the Catholic Church at first because, he was associated with the Catholic Church. And I didn't want to become Catholic then. I didn't feel like I knew enough about it. And we were just disturbed childishly, I think, that I was not able to receive communion. And then we did get married in the Catholic Church, but we had a sort of negative experience with the pastor, the Monsignor who married us. So it was just kind of a good excuse to, all right, let's find something else. Let's see what else is around. And we didn't know anything about denominations or anything. So we happened to live near a Mennonite church. So we went to a Mennonite church.
You're hitting all the items on the menu.
I know. I mean, which I think is so cool, because I think that's sort of what God did on purpose. Like, not to sort of get us in one place so that we sort of were forced to think about things in other ways. So we went to this Mennonite church for a little while, and but then we ended up moving. We were in outside Philadelphia area, and then we ended up moving to Maryland because Rob got transferred for work. And so we went to a Methodist church there for a little while. Again, we were very young. It just was like nearby. The church was pretty. And, then they had they had a nice group that met in the evenings that had a few couples our age, and some of whom we're still actually very good friends with today. So we had a good experience there. It was nice being in a small group. And, there were a few older couples who were very good at mentoring and moving people along. And then we started a Bible study in our neighborhood, and we lived in, like some condo townhouses, and we started a Bible study there. Back then it was easy to it's not something I do now. I wish I did, but I put notes up like I want to start a play group for kids, and then we gave all our neighbors letters about we'd like to do a Bible study and all those things, different time period, like in the early 80s. And so we ended up having this Bible study, and there was another couple. I think actually I met them through the play group I started, and then they were going to a PCA church, and they said, there's a new one starting, so why don't you come check this out? And we did, and we really liked that. And it was a very good experience for me, because I learned a lot about the Bible during that time period. Like, I learned a lot of history. We had a great pastor that was just it was like our age, and there was a lot of young couples. We had 2 children by that time, and it was a very good experience for me, especially. I think Rob and I have different temperaments, and our different things appeal to us. I'm much more in my head. He's much more in his emotions. Although interestingly, he was like the wonderful student. I was a little distracted, but memorization sort of information and I'm not good with that at all. So he was a brilliant student. I was not a brilliant student. And so then we were at the PCA church, then we got transferred again to Cincinnati, and we ended up going to a vineyard in Cincinnati. Yeah, I know, which is very different.
Denominational loyalty, not a thing in your path.
No, it really wasn't. It really wasn't.
Well, vineyards, it's kind of Presbyterian charismatic. So, but you're losing options on the menu. So you're going to have some blends in the mix.
Right. That's right. Well, when we were at the PCA church and we were joining, and we had the, I forget what you would know, possibly the book, whatever the book was that we had to read.
Probably the Westminster Confession.
Yeah, actually, you're right. It was the Westminster Confession that I should have known that. Anyway, which states that the Pope is the Antichrist. And we said, we said we just can't agree with that. Like, like we want to join the church, but we're not convinced of that. So um, we're sort of finding ways around, like, okay, how do we sort of fit into this place and appreciate the fellowship and the opportunity to grow and the things that are here.
In the late 20th
So
century, that's probably not a core belief in a lot of PCAs. So that one slide.
That's right. Yes, I know. I can't even remember what the response was. I think they were primarily surprised that we were actually reading all of the
I
information
expect
in
they
it,
were.
and sort of talking about it that
That's
specifically.
right.
But
Oh, you
but
read
they were
that?
very welcoming to us. Come and be part of us, and we're okay that you don't acknowledge that as a truth. And I think you're right. I don't think there was a strict adherence to that belief. So so then when we went to Cincinnati, it was interesting because we didn't really know what kind of church we were going to go to. We just we went to like a local Christian bookstore and said, are there any churches around here that do Bible studies? Like, do you sell a lot of Bible study books? And that had been a big part of our life. And Bible study was very much like small group too,
Right.
And so we did, he pointed us to, oh yeah, he said, there's this church right down the road, go check that out. He said, well, you could come to my church too, but you might really like that church. So there was something about the idea of him pointing us to a different church that made us think, okay, maybe that is where we should go. And we went there, and Steve Sjogren, I don't know if you've read any of his work. He actually was one of the founders of the Vineyard. And he happened to be there throwing a frisbee for his dog or something on the lawn. He was another person our age, and we got to talking, and he said, come. And so we had a very good experience there. We were only there for a year, but we got pretty involved in the year that we were there before we moved again. And it was just great. It was very different. Like, we had sort of been at the PCA church, and as the PCA church was growing, which I loved the church, I loved the people, but we noticed how similar everyone was getting, how like people would come in and they'd have these very different backgrounds, and then everybody would be so homogenized in the same movies they saw, the same books they read, the same things that were allowed. And so we had kind of been talking about that before we left. And then we got to Cincinnati and went to church, and there was like an older woman with blue hair worshiping, and right behind her was a rock and roll star with blue hair. And we just thought that was so great that there were these people that had such different backgrounds. So it was a very good experience for us. That was a year. Meanwhile, we had another child, so we had 3. And I was not working. I felt very committed. It was very important to me it was very surprising, because when I was pregnant with my first child, and because of what I had seen happen with my mother and my father, I never, ever intended to be dependent on my husband or any of that. And I was probably 6 or 7 months pregnant, and I was just seized with this conviction that I could not put my child in daycare. And I told Rob, this is what I'm thinking. We both had always assumed, of course, I would be working and she would go into daycare. And I told him, and he, praise God, believed that I was hearing from God and was trusting me. He made $14,000 a year, and we lived in a little townhouse. And it was 1980, but $14,000 did not go very far then either. So, I ended up waitressing at night a few nights a week. And I had always hoped to go to Rhode Island School of Design. When I would visit in New England, my family always said, as a kid, I always, was creating things and drawing things and painting. And so that was sort of my plan. But as things fell apart, I did not feel like I could leave the family. And so I went to the local community college. I don't know if I would have gotten accepted, but it's a really interesting thing, because I have a lot of people in my life right now who went to Rhode Island School of Design. But anyway, I went to the community college for a couple of years, and then I ended up working in in sales, and I did really well in sales and ended up managing my own office when I was 19. And then I ended up working in retail for a little while because I wanted to be on more regular hours because before we moved and had children. So then once we had kids, I stopped working, except I just did different things at nighttime to make money. And I did a lot of commission portrait work, charcoal portraits and things like that for people. Just little supplemental things, not anything, that I could have supported myself on. And so then we moved, Rob had a dream, a very specific dream when we'd been in Cincinnati for a year, that we both believed was leading us to come to New England. And that was kind of surprising because things were still very rough. Every time we would come up to visit, I would generally leave in tears. And, there were still things that were set off. There were new marriages and difficulties there. And so it wasn't good, but we were feeling very compelled by God to move. And our oldest daughter was 9 at the time. So we had 2 others. And then, so we thought, well, all right, however long it takes, we'll just put a couple of feelers out there and pray. And if it's supposed to happen, it will. And so Rob talked to a headhunter on the phone and said, this is what I'm interested in. And he said, oh, there's nothing happening up here right now. Thank you for your interest. But, the economy, the job situation is not good. And then he ended up getting 2 interviews within like 3 weeks and came up and had 2 job offers. So we said, okay, this must be real. This must be, what God is calling us to. So we came up, and there was a vineyard church that was starting in the area at the time too. So we thought, oh, this is all serendipitous. This is all part of the thing that we're supposed to be doing. So that was how many years ago? 30 years ago. We have been here all that time. Sometimes we wonder why, oftentimes we wondered why, just in terms of, actually, I can't really say that way. Now I don't want to question it at all. I feel very much like there's been many places and ways. I'm not sure what is happening right now, and I'm a little confused about that, but I'm trusting God. But in the beginning, we became part of a small group with some people in Providence from a church. It was very exciting and lots of good things happening. We've actually been through a few different churches up here too. Sometimes because our kids needed to be in a youth group, and we were living an hour away from the church and couldn't do it. And so, but the results of that is that we're very connected with different people. New England is so hard. It's a completely different church experience than we had anywhere else. Yes.
Yeah. Well, my mother and sister live in New England. And so my mother is from New England. So New England was sort of a second home growing up. We'd always come up from New Jersey. And so, yeah, I'm my father, when my parents retired, they moved back to New England. And so my father, after he retired, his upstate New York was the last church that he was in, but then, helping out churches in the town that my mother lives in, and in South, just over the Rhode Island border. And yeah, well, now you say not sure what's happening now. What do you mean? What did you mean by that? You're doing art now, and
yes.
Your kids are grown. You've been in this place for 30 years. You had a variety of church experiences. That was an interesting thing that you said. And you can pass on it. Or you could say, pause the recording and I'll tell you. We could do that too.
Well, you can always erase something if I say something I don't want to, right?
Yeah, I can.
All right. I don't think I'll say anything I don't want to, but just in case I slip. So it'll make me feel reassured.
Okay.
So we've been in a few different churches since we've been up here, and I see great value to people who stay in the same church for
Yes.
ever. I think that is a wonderful thing. So but I also don't think it's universal. I feel like
Yes.
some people in some circumstances, and I don't think there's anything in scripture that says we have to do that either. So I think that, you know, there are people that God chooses to move around for
Yep.
whatever reason.
Yep.
So we've been a part of a variety of churches here too, non-denominational churches. We were even part of a Grace Brethren church for a little while, and Evangelical Covenant Church a few times. Mhm.
You've been all over.
Yes, we really have. We really have.
Well, let me, before you go into too far into this, I got a question to ask you.
Mhm.
So I have, except for my time in the Dominican Republic, which was the Christian Reformed Church of the Dominican Republic, I have been in the Christian Reformed Church all my life. And that doesn't mean that I don't talk to people from other churches or have some experience with people from other churches. But what have you learned looking at this? You know, because you've had a few decades now visiting and being members of churches all over the evangelical and Christian menu in North America. What have you learned
Mhm.
about churches in North America?
That the denomination itself is not that significant in terms of how the people express their faith or respond. Some people are very much adhering to the place where they came from, and some people are not. So nobody seems to have the whole right picture, and nobody has the wrong picture. I feel like I think that God meets people where they are and in the spaces where they are. And sometimes people need one kind of thing more than another. So I think it's a beautiful thing that we have all different denominations. I think it's really good. And again, the older I get, the more I realize I don't know everything, or I realize I hardly know anything at all. So, you know, and we've been very involved. We've not ever been people who like said, well, I'm not getting anything out of this. It's not ever been that. I mean, my husband was a teaching elder, you know, in a church that didn't have a pastor. He was one of um, the teaching at a pretty large church for New England standards, you know, probably 400 people. And we've led small groups all along. I've led all kinds of women's Bible studies and women's study groups. I've spoken at retreats, and we've always been very involved. Sometimes the disagreements that we've ended up having have just precipitated the need to move on. You know, I mean, sometimes you can say, I'm going to stay here. This is fine. Like the Pope's not the Antichrist. That's fine. I can be there. But sometimes it puts you into a situation where you don't want to cause division in the church, or, you know, you don't want somebody to be looking at you feeling frustrated by your unwillingness to go along with what they want or something. So we've always prayed a lot that God would lead us where we're supposed to be. So the most recent church that we were heavily involved in is a great church our daughter goes, and she's quite involved. All of our kids are believers, which is pretty amazing. They're all very strong, faithful, very involved in their churches. And our youngest daughter was going to a new church that was starting up, whose pastor was like our kids' age, our older kids' age. And we went there for a while, and there's a lot of wonderful things that they're doing. There's a lot of great things that we're doing. And we were super involved in sort of launching it, because we became, I think, one of the first weeks or when we went a few times, one of the person who's now an elder said, oh, like, I guess we're a real church now, because with this older couple is coming, you know. So like, but I feel like we played the role that God designed for us to do there in sort of helping to legitimize who they were and supporting them. And it was a very good experience for the time that we were there, but it's very progressive. And we found more and more that there wasn't as much room to discuss some of the other sides of things. And I think a big part of that is just being a different generation, and young men dream dreams. I think that's a very true thing. Was often reminded when we were there that when I was their age, I wasn't looking to people my age for insight and wisdom and wanting to hear their perspective. And they may be doing exactly the right thing. So I don't claim to be that they're doing the wrong thing. That it's just a different thing than what I'm doing and a different thing than I feel led to. But it's I pray for them all the time because I think there's some very cool things that they're doing. And it's just a different way of looking at faith and Christianity and all of those things than I might have. So that was when we ended up moving again. We were living in the small city of Providence, and we ended up moving a little outside of the city last summer unexpectedly when there were helicopters flying over the house quite often, and the firecrackers were going off every night. It just was a little tense from all the rioting. Wow. And we never got it. We were sort of in a lovely area of Providence. We didn't get it too badly, but it was just, we weren't sleeping. It was just very stressful. And we happened to go visit some friends who lived somewhere else, and they said, we think we could sell your house and it would go really well. And we were like, all right, well, let's try it. And then we didn't expect it to quite sell so fast and not have time to think about it. So since we've been in a different place, we've been kind of trying to figure out what to do. And I'm finding it a little hard to find people. I mean, almost everyone that I know is very progressive, or they're very conservative. I know when I spoke with Karen about this, she expressed something very similar. And so I'm having a hard time, and I know they must be there. So, and that's partly why I contacted you, because I thought, you may be able to help me connect with people who are wanting to have the conversations and wanting to talk and wanting to say, this is what my journey's been, and where do I go with it from here? It's getting late. I see we're almost out of time. I don't want to.
No, we're okay. We're all right. I don't have anything at the top of the hour, so we're good.
Okay. So my husband has gotten involved in the Marked Men. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
No.
It's sort of
they're ominous.
Yeah, a church we were visiting. It's actually been very life-changing for him, and as a result, very life-changing for both of us. We went through some things too a few years ago, and this has been pretty remarkable how the changes that have worked out in our lives as a result of that. So he's gotten kind of more involved in this particular church just because of his involvement with that. It's not actually through the church, but it's there's the person who runs it in the New England area goes to the church. So we have occasionally visited. With COVID, churches have not really been meeting regularly anyway. So I don't know. Part of what I think is for and then the other people that are in my life that are very important to me are my artist friends, because I ended up, when my youngest was in high school, I went back to school, finished my undergrad degree, and got a BFA in painting, and then went and did landscape design, worked landscape design for a while, which I could do as a independent consultant. And I worked primarily for one landscape nursery, but I was still able to do it on my own time. Most of the work I did at home. But then I wasn't earning anything towards retirement. So when I was 49, I decided I better get a job or I wasn't going to be able to get a job that had retirement. So I took the Massachusetts teachers licensing exams and got a preliminary license to teach art in high school, and then got a job teaching art. And then in a high school, worked there for 8 years, and then was having very little time in the studio. And that was frustrating and disappointing. And so there was a new school opening up, which was a virtual school, fully virtual. And so I decided to give that a shot. And I've been there for 5 years now, 6 years.
COVID didn't
It's
bother that one a bit.
Right, exactly. Except we got a lot more kids. Yeah, we went from like 300 kids to, I think our numbers, well, we have 300, it was originally when I started 300 kids K to 12. Now we've got 1,200 kids just in high school. So
Wow.
it's a big group. So yes, so I teach art there, and we're actually a public school, which is kind of interesting the way it works. But I have a lot more time in the studio. And particularly when we moved to the city, I was able to get juried into a great art group there. And I've been able to do more exhibiting. And when we go anywhere, I talk to galleries. And so I've gotten really good reception, and that's been wonderful. I wish I had more time to do that, and, trying to figure out when it's safe to retire so I can devote myself to that. And then I have these 8 wonderful grandchildren that I love to spend time with, and
Yeah.
trying to work that out. And I have a
Yeah.
great husband to spend time with. So just all those, working out all of that. But I have been able to paint like crazy. But all my artist friends, they're way, way progressive. So I know I didn't say that properly, but I love talking art with them, and I love talking mystical ideas with them, but there's not always a lot of opportunity to talk about faith with them.
That's interesting. Well, and when you say that, well, let me ask it this way. Well, so what are you looking for? Are you looking for a church where you're more on footing with people? Are you looking for a group where you can, and what kinds of things would you want to discuss?
Well, I meet with a critique group now. I mean, the club where I was a part of, we were not able to do as much in person as we were. And a lot of the people there are retired. So more that happens goes on during the day rather than in the evening when I'm available. But I do meet with a crit group, and that it's great. I mean, right now we're still doing it virtually. So everything's gotten to be virtual. I would love to be able to share my work with people and talk about how we feel like the Spirit is leading what we're doing. And I would like to be able to, I would like to be able to talk about it from the perspective, not only from an art criteria, but how it fits in with, and it doesn't even have to be people who are creating art, like I'd like to be a part of a group that is willing to talk about ideas, and that art would be a part of that. So I heard you mention, that's why I got in touch with you. I heard you mention something about a group that was doing something or meeting somewhere or something. And I love my art people in my life. And there's a couple of them that are, I don't want to say there's nobody, there's a couple, but it's just hard sometimes to figure it out,
Well, that's really interesting to me, because I mean, part of why I started my YouTube channel was I was looking for more conversation partners about the peculiar things that I was interested in. Of course, I was interested in what Jordan Peterson was doing. I thought it was significant. I didn't know who around me, I had a couple of pastors that I'd talked about it with, but it was quite clear I had more appetite for conversation about this than they did, and I'm not about to. You can you impose on people, and you watch the eyes glaze over, and it's like, I don't want to waste your time. Life is too short. So that's part of how I started my YouTube channel, and it obviously has grown since then quite a bit, and has produced something of a network. And obviously, in terms of the network that it has produced, a lot of it discusses faith, but certainly not all of it, because there are many people in the network who are not Christians.
Mhm.
They wouldn't describe themselves as religious at all, or of other religions, or spiritual, or something. So I, in the last 3 years, have certainly learned something about the capacity of most of what I do on Zoom and YouTube, and then Discord, the Discord server. Those have been sort of the ways that I've grown this. Karen, who I pointed you to, her with her Meaning Code channel, she, after I started making videos about Jordan Peterson, she contacted me, and she's in the Bay Area. I'm in Sacramento, so it's not a crazy drive at all. And so she came to a couple of our local meetups. I had a couple of conversations with her via the channel. She started her own channel, and she has developed in that channel really another whole community of people. Her videos are usually one or two at a time. And when I listen to you, it almost sounds like you're looking to develop. Oh, it's really cool. It's a really cool image or picture of some like-minded, well, not too like-minded. You don't want that, but getting the relevance realization right, getting, enough commonality around art, at least an openness with respect to faith. Probably the people don't have to share everything that you have with respect to your faith, and then figure out how how to create a community. One of the interesting things about the internet and these tools that we're using is that they do collapse time and space. In that, now we're talking live right now, but and I do a fair amount of live conversation, obviously, but it's also a way of, I publish a video, someone else publishes a video, and we sort of are connected in a
Mhm.
large disconnected conversation that I personally find enriching. It helps. I wouldn't still be doing this thing for 3 years if I didn't find it satisfying and productive for my own development, my own spiritual growth. And of course, I'm, deeply embedded in a church, obviously. So it sounds to me like that's something of what you're looking for, or maybe even interested in developing. Do I have that right?
I would definitely consider developing it if I could figure out the time. Like, the timing is just the tricky part. But I mean, I would definitely consider that. And as you said, they don't have to be artists. They don't have to be Christians. I'm just wanting people who are open to the conversation, who are open to sharing ideas, who don't feel like they understand exactly how things work, kind of, or that how the spirit is moving through. What are the messages that people are bringing in with art or with something else, with what they're writing or what they're reading. Or older people are so often, and they don't have to be older people. I actually have a lot of younger people in my life, but there's also shared experience with people of all different ages, and it's nice to get um, that information too. So people who are open to different ideas.
I it's been interesting in the development of this channel and sort of the networking community around it. There have been a fair number of illustrators. I have recently had some conversations with some. There are a certain number of them on the Discord server who are illustrators. A fair number of artists that I've had conversation with. I had conversation with one young woman from Grand Rapids a couple of years ago now, and of course Karen in the Bay Area. Um, even Mary Cohen, who doesn't necessarily um, identify as an artist, or she doesn't. But when I listen and talk to Mary, she certainly is someone who has a lot of aesthetic sensitivities. I think about Sally Joe. Is she in Florida now? I think she's in Orlando area. And so actually I don't know that starting something like this would be that difficult.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
don't know that that would be that difficult at all. I kind of wonder, just even fact doing this conversation and a few emails, if in fact the question, if in fact just off the top of my head, I could probably pull together 4, 6, 8 invitations, just people that I have emails of and know by name and have a degree of confidence that they might be open to something like this. And usually something like this has a chance to grow in other ways. In fact, my sister, who is in Connecticut, and
Hmm.
I've done before COVID, I did a retreat, just an overnight retreat with a bunch of people from my channel. She
Ah.
has a farmhouse
Oh,
in
cool.
Connecticut that she has kind of turned into sort of a bed and breakfast. So she's got enough bedrooms that she can host a lot of people. And so I
Mm.
did sort of a 24-hour thing there at her place. So no, if this is, well, let me ask you this question. Have you gotten onto the Bridges of Meaning Discord server at all? I
I
tried
have
any of
not.
that?
No.
Because one of the questions I would have, if you're going to try to set up a virtual group,
Mhm.
um, what tool works best? Now, the three main tools I've used, maybe four, would be obviously YouTube, Zoom, Discord, and then also to a degree Twitter. Facebook. I have so much contempt for Facebook. I don't even check my messages, which I have enough guilt over to feel it, but not so much that I change anything.
Yeah. Yes, I
So
know. I try to make myself once a week go on, and even that is really hard.
yeah. So is that the kind of, I mean, what kind of pacing would you want from such a group in terms of check-in? If it had to be synchronous check-in, or would it more be something that people could post and when you've got time, you check it and have conversations that way? Because that often, what tool you'll use depends on really timing and how that works. If you're talking live like we are now, which is, it's very intense, but it also means that you and I, which for you and I, it took a little doing to actually find the time so we could talk at the same time. Whereas with Discord, once you get enough people together, it's sort of a text chat, and every now and then you've got video chat and voice chat. So what are your thoughts on, or are you saying, no, I want a live group in person?
Um, I understand the limitations of the current situation that we're in. So I'm kind of open. I would love to do something regular, whether it's once a month or twice a month or something like that. And it would be great if it was live. It doesn't have to be in person. I sort of can't even imagine that. And I'm probably being too cynical about it, that I wouldn't find people up here. I'm sure there are people up here, and I'm sure, as you said, um,
You should
with a
meet my
little bit,
sister.
I
You should
should,
you should
yes.
meet my sister. My sister is something else. And we
Yeah.
haven't when on email we can talk more specifics, but it doesn't sound like you're very far away from her at all. New
Okay,
England's a
that
pretty
sounds,
small place.
yes, that's right. It really is. That's great. I would like that. So I'm really kind of open. I'm willing to let the spirit lead. I feel like we're on the cusp of something in the world, and I would like to explore that with people who are also open to that idea, and try to sort of see what are the different, even my husband and I, as I said, our temperaments are so different, and part of our sort of getting to the place where we could not be threatened or envious of the things that the Lord was working in each of us, but instead accept them as, isn't this cool that we're so different and the Lord is working out, giving us both different pieces of something. And I feel like we're in a good space with that right now. I'd love to meet with other people who don't necessarily see things the same way as me, but I want to learn from other people and I want to share with other people. I've been learning so much in the last few years. Like I just, my head feels a little overwhelmed and also so excited about what's going on. And everything's a little scary and uncertain right now too, but I'm trying to decipher the different things coming through and respond in the way that God wants me to in the kingdom, and be whatever he's calling me to be in that. And so I'm not sure what that looks like. And I don't mean that to be evasive. I just mean I'm kind of open. Like I'm so excited about what I've been painting and how that is going and what's occurring there, that I'd love to share it with other people that are sort of willing to look at it from a spiritual perspective as well as an aesthetic perspective.
Well, if we said that anyone who is interested in this you can leave a comment below.
Mhm.
You can email me if you can figure out my email address. It's really hard to figure out, isn't it? My email address is such a mystery.
Is it really? I did email you though. We've been
Yes, you did.
communicating email, so I figured it out. Right.
It's such a mystery. I mean, it's amazing anybody can figure out what my email address is. Um, or on the Bridges of Meaning Discord, because again, I can think of another thing that's interesting on the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, and I'll send you a link to that after we're done here, and I'll send you a whole bunch of stuff in that email.
That's great.
Another thing that has happened on the Bridges of Meaning Discord server is that even though the server is probably 90% men,
Mhm.
the women on the server, they in some ways rule the server. It's a very interesting dynamic, and many of those women are artists. That's
Huh, that's
been
interesting.
very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some of those, not all of those women are in their 20s and 30s. Some
Hmm.
are older. And so, and even again, I know when we started this, you said most of the people I see on your channel are young men. That's true, partly because young men are like, yeah, play it on YouTube, I don't care. But
Mhm.
there are a fair number of women who do watch my channel and sort of keep a much lower profile.
Mm.
And so I would say if this is something you're interested in, anybody watching this video who has gotten all the way to the end here, here's a little prize for sticking it out. Contact me one way or another. Can be on Twitter, can be on the Discord server, can be via email. And if you're interested in sort of exploring what could be done in terms of a group like this, let's see if, I mean, I'm not an artist. I probably won't be active in this group, but I can facilitate people having each other's email addresses and figuring out where to start with this stuff. And maybe, because I really love the vision, and right from the start, part of my mission in what I've been doing is to try to facilitate groups, the formation of groups. Sometimes that's online, but even the online groups, I have a preference that an online group is okay, but I'll tell you, when you get together in person, it's
Yeah.
so much better.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
So how does that sound to you? Does that sound like
Oh,
something
that
you?
sounds great. I appreciate your help with it so much, Paul. I know I could not reach the people. And so I'm very, very grateful. I appreciate anything that you are able to do in moving this forward. And again, I kind of feel like I'm, around and part of the journey, but I'm willing to take the reins in whatever way I need to too. So I don't know what that means. I'm just open to what it might mean.
Well, in my experience, we've built a lot of this just sort of ad hoc. And now I've got enough of a network that if you need a little help, setting up, let's say, a portion on the Discord server, that's easily done. I could just, I can either do it myself or ask Rick or Joey or someone to do it. And a number of the people on the server, you know, immediately I think about Sally Joe, who I just had a conversation with recently, who is an artist. And I can think of another number of people that I can just put an email group together and shoot it all together and say, hey, is this listen to this video right here. Does this kind of group really excite you? And I think actually partly it's been so funny because, you know, it's been the women, and again, there's so few of them, but it's been the women in this community that have been so active and so often doers,
Hmm.
whereas
Hmm.
the men sometimes need a little bit more, you know, got to get them going a little bit. But the women, once the women see something, boom, they're on it and it happens. So that's why the women in this community have been so important. So I don't know, is that a good place to stop? And then I'm going to send you an email and I'm going to get this ball rolling and we can see where it goes.
Are you there? You froze for a second.
Oh, yep. I said, so is this a good place to stop? Shall we get this thing going and see where it goes? It's kind of exciting. I'm really quite excited about this because I think there's a lot that can happen.
Yeah, I think that's very cool. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that very much. Should you want to put a link to my website or anything too, in case anybody wants to see what sort of work I do and as a way to sort of help them see where I'm coming from in what my work looks like?
Yes, definitely. I think, did you send that to me on the initial email you sent me?
I did, because you told me you looked at it. I had the giant ice cubes, although you probably couldn't tell they were giant, but and the story about C.S. Lewis and which when is this going to air? Because it will be a good deadline for me to make sure I put some of my more recent things up there.
See, the problem I have is when something like this happens, I don't want to wait. I want to do it like tomorrow, because the truth is,
no, that's fine. I'll do it tonight.
the truth is, if I wait till Monday, I get distracted with, you know, I've got my sermon between now and Monday, and I've got my, we've got the generational handshake, our generational handoff conversation, panel discussion on the Discord tomorrow morning. And I mean, the way my life is going right now, there's 10 things that are going to intervene. I'm going to have some new video ideas that I'm going to want to do. There's 10 things that are going to intervene before Monday for me. Yes. And so if you're okay with me sharing, is anything you say in the video that you'd want me to take out? Just kind of going back over it mentally.
I mean, is there anything that you heard that
it sounded good to me.
You think it's okay?
I think you were fair.
Okay.
Sometimes people say things to me in videos. It's like,
yeah.
And I don't want to be a part of someone blowing up somebody else's life. I don't want that on my channel. So, but you didn't say anything that I think would be, oh, you shouldn't have said that. So.
Okay. All right. That's good. That's very good to know. So yeah, no, I so appreciate what you're doing. I mean, I can see that you're putting all these things together and people together and circumstances. So what a cool thing for you to be involved in, you know, like, I just think, cool. You know, I mean, as a pastor, like not only being able to reach your congregation, but all of these other people that you're involved with, it's a very exciting thing. And hearing all these young men who are telling you their stories of how they came to faith. And it's so remarkable what's happening right now. Like, it's just, again, it's one of the things that convinces me we're right on the cusp of something. The more I learn, the more I'm finding words to describe some of that and learning that there's a whole lot of other people. It's just so fascinating too, because, you know, you start listening and then all these ideas that you feel like you've been thinking about for 5 years, or you're hearing other people express them and they have words for them.
Yes.
It's great.
It is. Well, wonderful, Sherry. This has been terrific. And I'm going to send you an email right away and add some email links to some people that, you know, I've already sent you Karen's contact. But again, it's been really incredible for me how many artists have responded to my channel I
Yeah,
didn't expect that, but
yeah.
that happened. So, and I'm going to put you in contact with my sister because
I would love it.
I think you two are going to have fun.
I would love that. That would be great. Really
If
good.
if you think if you think I'm an extrovert, my sister is a whole nother level. And my sister's an artist, and
Oh,
my
great.
sister's a musician. And my sister is so much fun.
Mm.
Um, Little chaotic, more chaotic
Yeah,
than I
yeah,
am,
yeah.
but again, I think she'll, and she's doing everything right now. She's doing a
Sorry, you're
podcast.
frozen again. I don't know if you
Oh, okay. Well, I'll send you all the stuff, but this has been
okay.
great fun to share. And again, if you've got to this point and you're interested in something like this, send it to me, or your website will be down there. So I imagine they could probably contact you through it.
Yep.
Um, yeah, one way or another, I'll just push all that stuff over to you that comes my way. And you can, and if you need help facilitating something like getting together with a Zoom call, I'll send you an invitation to the Discord. Discord isn't the easiest thing to learn at first, but after
Mhm.
you get to know it, it's quite a flexible tool. And that's part of the reason, and it's free. So that's part of the reason we've used it. So,
Okay. That's great to hear. Thank you very much.
all right, Sherry, we will be in
All right.
touch.
Thank you so much. That sounds
Okay.
great, Paul. You have a good evening. Take
Okay. You too.
care. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.